Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Push to Pass F1 podcast. Now, I understand this looks weird. It is just me. But unfortunately, there is no Reef this week. Reef is currently on holiday. I think he's in Forteventura or he's in one of the Canary Islands with his girlfriend, so we are wishing him a good time. He hasn't quit just yet, don't worry. So you were stuck with me this week, and for this week only, because I go on holiday in 2 weeks, so then you will have just Reef. But we are at that time of the week where last week's race weekend is sort of starting to fizzle out and the change is going to the upcoming race weekend. So I think it's a good point to look back on the Imola Grand Prix weekend, which overall I think delivered quite a solid weekend. You know, qualifying had its dramas and it had plenty of talking points, and you know, it wasn't a boring session, but it continued the theme of good qualifying sessions for this year, which sometimes Imola can lack. And the race on its whole was, you know, probably one of the better ones we've had this weekend. So as a starting point, let's jump into that qualifying session. And really the first place and the only place I can think to start off is the two big crashes. And I say two big crashes, one was far bigger than the other. I think Yuki Tsunoda was incredibly lucky to walk away from his accident. You know, Yuki's having quite a troubled time, I think it's fair to say, at Red Bull, and it felt like he was potentially trying to overdrive the car. A crash like that in Q1 doesn't really, if you look at that on face value, that's not something you would expect. So yeah, it was weird, but like I said, incredibly surprised that he's walked away from that completely unscathed. It was a huge incident. The first I've seen a car roll in F1 for a long time, probably since Guan Yu Zhou's crash back in the Silverstone Grand Prix back in 2022, is probably the last time I can remember a car rolling over. But, you know, it's more credit and more just praise that every fan, I think, can provide to the Halo device and the safety measures that the FIA have come in. I think people were very skeptical of the Halo when it first came in. People felt it was very unnecessary, but not even in F1. I saw, and a lot of motorsports fans saw, the incident with Colton Herta in the Indy 500 qualifying, which saw him have a massive accident and roll. And, you know, he skidded probably about 150 metres, probably more, on his roof, and definitely was saved by the aero shield. And so yeah, those devices, I'm so sorry for that, that's probably sound terrific. Those devices which, you know, just aid driver safety, I think they really earned their credit this weekend, and I think they did a fantastic job. But yeah, Yuki's having a troubled time, and I know Reef would probably call him cute and just past it and just put it behind him, but I think questions are going to be quickly asked about Yuki if he doesn't pick up his performances, because any other team you wouldn't accept this, and it does feel like Yuki is sort of getting, you know, like a free pass just because people like him and people want him to do well, and they're sort of willing to give him a bit more wiggle room. But someone who people are not willing to give wiggle room is Signor Franco Colapinto, who also had an accident in qualifying, completely wrecking his Alpine in probably the worst way to start your career with Alpine. I think Flavio Briatore before the weekend literally said all he has to do is drive fast and not crash the car, and he crashed it in qualifying, which is, it was something that I certainly felt we could see from Colapinto, especially from what we saw with Williams. You know, he was a driver who had great pace, and he was a driver who had the potential, don't get me wrong, to provide a result and to definitely, you know, bring in results that a midfield or potentially towards the back of the midfield team would warrant as a success. But he was also very much, I think I described him as a chaos like driver, where you never know if you're going to get points or you're going to have a huge $1 million crash. And yeah, it's just such a messy way to start a career with a team like Alpine, and especially how cutthroat they were with Jack Doohan. You're not really backing up your case too well. Other things to talk about from qualifying: Ferrari had a disaster, both knocked out in Q2. Yeah, it was weird, but also that was more to the credit of Aston Martin, who were fantastic and somehow managed to get medium tyres to work like qualifying tyres, which just didn't make much sense to me. But yeah, Ferrari's woes certainly in qualifying just continue. But moving, I'm just looking at my notes now. I think that's it for qualifying. Yeah, let's move into the race. And I'm going to start with potentially a hot take, but Max Verstappen and that turn one overtake is, I don't want to say without doubt, it's comfortably one of, but in my opinion, it is the best turn one overtake I have ever seen in Formula One. He has no right at all to swing one down the outside into that turn one complex, and then it's just, he gets through it so cleanly and so well that I think, and I think a lot of people also thought, that he completely just caught Oscar off guard and completely caught him by surprise. And, you know, moves like that are the reason why Max Verstappen is held to such high regard, but it's also the reason why I think he has a good chance of still being in this title fight for this season. And I definitely think, performances like that and performances where he's able to pick up race wins now and again and disrupt McLaren and not allow them to get continuous rolls of just race weekend wins, I think can be huge for his title fight. And I think it'd be huge for the title fight in general, because it always keeps, both McLarens will always be second guessing of, if they don't deliver, the likelihood is Max will. So I think that was huge for me in terms of more than just a race, but I think it puts it plays its part in the entire championship, picture. What have I got noted down next? Yeah, I think I'm currently wearing his team colours, but I think the next sort of area I want to talk about, I'll talk about, because I'm going to still do our traditional driver ratings. Lando Norris had, I'm going to say, probably his second best race weekend of the season, close to what he had in Australia, because, look, he benefited hugely from McLaren potentially messing up Oscar's strategy, and there was that factor of Oscar being on, I think it was 15 or so older lap older. Why can't I speak? 15 or so lap older tyres. There we go. Then Oscar. No, other way around. Oscar had the older tyres than Lando. Jesus Christ, you can tell I'm missing Reef. And I think that massively helped Lando. But also, just Lando had to. I myself and me and Reef have been so critical of Lando this year, of being scared to make moves and not making the most of, the car that he had underneath him. But I think this weekend he got pretty much, the maximum that he could from this race weekend, and I think it'll be a really big confidence builder for him. Another good performer, I'm not even going to call it a performer, I'm going to call it a great performer, who I should have predicted, and I predicted the wrong Williams to get a podium. Alex Albon was agonisingly close to getting a podium. I think it was P4 or 5 he finished on the road in the end, which, no one, well, I did, no one probably would have expected that. So moving ahead now into a slightly different version of one of our regular subjects and parts of this show. We have the rating of the top 10 drivers. So your top 10 finish for the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix was: in P10, Yuki Tsunoda; P9, Isaac Hadjar; P8, Carlos Sainz; and then P7, George Russell; P6, Charles Leclerc; P5, Alexander Albon; P4, Lewis Hamilton; P3, Oscar Piastri; P2, Lando Norris; and P1, Max Verstappen. Overall, probably one of the weirder top 10s in terms of order. Just looking at it on face value, like how Hamilton has finished ahead of someone like a Leclerc and Russell, it's just one of those races. But first of all, Yuki Tsunoda in P10. I'm going to go with a 5 out of 10. Or do I? No, I'll give him a 6. Although he had that massive accident, I think he did incredibly well to fight back into the points. from where he started. And also that battle with Fernando Alonso at the end was really nice. A bit unlucky on Fernando's part. But I think, Yuki can build confidence off the fact that he's come back from his crash and the fact that he's sort of turned his whole weekend around with a race like that. So I think it's really good. P9, Isaac Hadjar. I am going to go with an 8. Ooh, I'm biting my tongue here to not sound like an Isaac Hadjar fanboy, but I am. I'm going to give him an 8 out of 10. I think Hadjar is comfortably proven himself as probably the best performing rookie so far this season. I don't think many people would debate that. Especially in qualifying, his qualifying pace, I think, has really impressed me. And, he looks like such a seasoned driver for a rookie. He almost looks far more experienced than he actually is, which, as a rookie, you can't really ask for much more. And, he's someone who you would comfortably put in the points, I'd say nearly every week or every other weekend. You'd sort of assume him to be within the points, and for an RB, for an RB anyway, that's a good result. But for a rookie and an RB, that's, I think, very, very impressive. P8, we have Carlos Sainz. I still think it's a good weekend. I'm going to go with a 7 out of 10. I think he obviously would have preferred to be closer to his teammate, but I think also just the way the race unfolded, it didn't really pay Carlos many favours. P7, George Russell. I will go with a 6 out of 10. Probably I think it is actually Russell's worst weekend in terms of the points scored and the position he finished. But yeah, a weird weekend for Mercedes. In general, to be fair, it just didn't really look like they were, up to the pace of the Ferraris, and they didn't really look like they were that close to the front pack as they usually are, which is weird because we're so used to seeing George in and around the podium, or we're so used to seeing George, scoring high points, that a P7 is probably quite disappointing for him. P6 for Charles Leclerc. It did look like at one point he was potentially going to get on the podium with his master strategy, but I think anyway you can give him a 7 out of 10. I think a great reaction from his qualifying to his race, a great way to bounce back, and a P6 in a Ferrari is sort of where I think people would expect them to be in and around achieving. They're nowhere near the quickest cars. They're probably not close enough to the podium yet, although Hamilton did ultimately nearly get there. But I think they're not quite there in terms of bridging the gap to the front two yet. So look, it's a good result. It probably would have been better if qualifying didn't see him knocked out in Q2, but that's all in the name of hindsight, and overall I think a decent weekend. P5, Alexander Albon. I am going to go with a 9 out of 10. Very nearly a 10 out of 10, but if it wasn't for the sort of little kerfuffle thing at the end, which really wasn't his fault, so I am being a bit harsh because Leclerc was forced to give the place back. I think he very well could have been on for a podium, if not a P4, which I think I'm right in saying would have been his first podium since 2020, when he was at Red Bull. But no, look, Albon is very much proving a lot of people, including myself, really very much wrong. That a lot of people thought that, Sainz would just wipe the floor with him, but it wasn't the case, and it's definitely not the case. Albon is more than holding his own, and he's given a really good account of himself to potentially get back up to a top team. And this weekend just showed him and Williams are very much not far off getting some podiums this year, and I think we are definitely going to see a Williams on minimum 2 podiums this season. And if what we are seeing is true, that they've abandon this year and they're going just for 2026, then that 2026 car is going to be nothing short of incredible. P4, we have Lewis Hamilton. What a result. Knocked out in Q2, managed the race really well, dealt with all the safety cars really well, and was on the right tyre at the right time, reacted to stuff going on around him, benefited hugely from the incident between Charles and Alex, but, you've got to be there to capitalise that, and he did. And I'm not going to say Hamilton and Ferrari is still clicking, because it's very much not, and they're very far off getting the most from that pairing, but slight results like this, they would, I'm not a Ferrari fan, but I think as a Ferrari fan, they would give you hope that potentially there is something there that, could potentially see some better results towards this European leg and towards the end of the season. P3, Oscar Piastri, I'd say he got taught a lesson, definitely this Sunday, with the turn 1 incident with Max. I think he's now much more the wiser to realise you can give Max room, but if you give him enough room to even make an impossible move, to even attempt it, he will go for it, like we saw in turn 1. So, but still, pole position wasn't horrific in the race, got kind of screwed over by McLaren's strategy. The safety cars and virtual safety cars didn't help him at all. So it's not a weekend he can really complain too much about. A lot didn't go in his favour, but also if he holds the lead in turn 1, he's probably benefiting from that. He's probably winning the race. So I'll go with a 7 out of 10. P2, Lando Norris. Now, this was a good result for Mr. Lando, and one that I think myself and a lot of people felt he very much needed. He very much needed a result where he not only gets one over an Oscar, but just generally has a good weekend. And I think that is what we got. P2, look, there's an argument that he could have potentially challenged Max a bit more, but also Max was really just, in his own way, just in a league of his own. So I think Lando really extracted the most he can, and I think it should give him a bit more confidence now going into the European leg of the season, where we could potentially see Lando, crawl that championship lead back and potentially just bring the championship fight closer. I think it's only about 11-12 points anyway, so it's not a huge gap for him to bridge, but no, I think Lando can be happy this weekend. And of course, P1, Max Verstappen. What a drive. It's a 10 out of 10 for me. There's just people who've doubted Max Verstappen, I think, can watch that race and realise why so many people hold him so highly and why so many people think so highly of him, because that race was just perfect from him. He did everything he could off the start. He didn't even look like he had the greatest of starts. It looked like Russell was going to get the lead, but he just absolutely slung one around the outside and kept it clean, kept it tight, and didn't really look back from that. So yeah, it was so good from Max, and he has to be within the talk of a title contender for sure. You can never write off Max Verstappen, and I'm gonna stop pretending and stop buying into this. The Red Bull isn't great dust. It don't get me wrong, it's nowhere near as dominant as they have been, but it's also not a tractor like some people are playing it down to. It's close to the McLaren, certainly over one lap, and on certain circuits it's clearly able to go toe to toe with the McLaren. So I think into this midfield sort of part of the season, I think Max could really come away with some strong results. So, who is my biggest loser from the weekend? There's a few. Well, I predicted Ollie Behrman to be best good surprise, and he finished 17th. My dog is barking, do apologise. Biggest loser, I will go... Yeah, I'll go with Haas. They were very, very weird, and I just didn't really get... I don't get their performance. It's so hit and miss. They're they're either really good and they're close to getting in the points, or they are just nowhere near. And this weekend showed Ocon retired, Bayman finished last bar one, finished P17. It's just not a good weekend for Haas, and I don't see them improving anytime soon. I don't see them getting anywhere closer in the midfield. I can just see them potentially picking up a few results here and there if things go their way. My biggest winner of the weekend is quite comfortably... Oh, is it quite comfortably? I want to go... It's between Max Verstappen and Alex Albon comfortably. I'll go with Alex. I think he really, really gave a good showing in Imola, and I don't think he would have expected much more. I don't think the team would have expected anywhere near what he did, but I think he's slowly building up some really good momentum, and like I said, I think we could potentially see him on the podium in 2 or 3 races this season. So I think it's just overall been a really good weekend with him. So now let's change our focus. Let's leave the magical world of Italy behind, and let's go to my least favourite Grand Prix of the weekend. Of the year. It's not actually. It's the Monaco Grand Prix this weekend. Something to note, really, for this year's Monaco Grand Prix is it is a mandatory 2-stop pit stop strategy. Now, I don't think... There's been a lot of talk about this, whether it's actually going to work, whether it's going to make any difference, blah, 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 blah. I'm scared it's not going to make a difference. I'm scared it's going to make the issue worse. And I think Bernie Collins from Sky made a really good comment about this, where she said, like, if I was a back marker team, I would just pit on lap 1, try go to the end, and just try get track position. And, you know, I don't want to see that, but also I understand that, you know, track position is king in Monaco. So by forcing teams to make another stop, they can't just do the we'll pit and then just hold out for the rest of the race. You've sort of got to balance that between making your first stop and then gaining a gap, and then making your second stop and then gaining that gap back. So I think it will be interesting, but also I'm not too hopeful for it. It's just Monaco in general. I'm never hopeful. McLaren having a livery. It is based off of the car which Bruce McLaren and Denny Hulme drove, I think. It's actually quite nice. It's nowhere near the Senna livery we got last year, which was absolutely gorgeous. But I still think it's quite a nice livery. And finally, Aston Martin are looking likely to continue their upgrades, despite saying they're going to abandon 2025 and go straight to 2026. So I think they bought new floor and new side pods to Imola, I think. And yeah, apparently they're just going to keep upgrading, and they've got a few upgrades in the pipeline. So we early on in the season thought they were just going to completely abandon 2025 and just go straight to 2026, but it doesn't appear to be that. It does appear they want to actually spend this year not as just a holiday for both their drivers. So I like that. I'm a big fan of, you know, Fernando Alonso, and I just want to see more teams fighting in an already contested midfield, which will just be pure chaos. But let's do some predictions for the Monaco Grand Prix of 2025. My top 3 in qualifying. I will go P3, Lando Norris. P2, downforce. P2, I will go with Max Verstappen. And P1, I will go with Oscar Piastri. I don't think we're going to have a Charles Leclerc miracle drive. I think those days are not over. I just think the Ferrari's not as good as last year, and I don't think we can get that. For the race, I will go with an Oscar Piastri win. I will go with P2, Lando Norris. I'll go P3, George Russell. I expect some chaos. I don't think it's going to rain this weekend, which is good. It was raining there earlier in the week, but I think it's dry for the full weekend, which will be nice. Yeah, I'm not looking forward to Monaco. I've said my opinions on Monaco plenty of times on this channel and in our episodes. It's not for me at all. But yeah, it's okay. A biggest good surprise for Monaco, who is decent on street tracks, Sergio Perez. Give me biggest good surprise. I will go with Pierre Gasly. Why not? Frenchman in Monaco, do it. I think Alpine could potentially get a good result as long as they don't try and jump into the harbour. Biggest, worst surprise, I will go with... Oh, yeah, Charles Leclerc. Why not? Curse the hometown hero. See if I can make anything come true. And my random prediction is that the two-stop strategy mandatory thing majig will not work, and we will ultimately come to next weekend's episode where Reef is back and we'll be slating Monaco. But if you do want to watch good racing, the Indy 500 is on the same day as the Monaco Grand Prix, but it's on in the evening, which I'll be watching because I like the Indy 500, because it's usually just people driving really quick, really stupidly, and leads to a big crash. But I hope you have enjoyed this. Really, this has just been a ramble. I'm literally just talking to my iPhone with a microphone in front of me. So if you have enjoyed this episode and you are listening on Spotify, don't forget to rate us 5-star and drop us a follow. It massively helps. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to drop us a like and a subscribe. It also massively helps. YouTube is actually currently our most popular form of these episodes, so if we can get a few more listeners on Spotify, that would be huge. But I also do appreciate you all on the YouTube. And yeah, I've enjoyed making this video. I've enjoyed making this episode. I've enjoyed this channel. I enjoy life. But I hope you have enjoyed. I've been Max, and this has been the Push to Pass F1 podcast.